In the summer of 1929, in the basement of a small hospital on the outskirts of Berlin, a dim lamp cast its yellow glow onto the cold edge of a surgical knife. A young intern stood before a mirror, rolling up his left sleeve and injecting local anesthetic into his own arm. At that time, the human heart was considered an absolute forbidden zone in medicine. Even listening to it required a silk handkerchief placed between the stethoscope and the chest. Yet this young doctor was preparing to push a 70-centimeter catheter directly into his own heart. No one knew whether this reckless self-experiment was madness or a daring move that would usher in modern cardiology. His name was Werner Forssmann. Born on the 29th of August 1904 in a middle-class Berlin family, he lost his father in the First World War and was raised by his mother. As a teenager, he showed a stubborn, restless desire for risk. At 12, he climbed Berlin's tallest chimney alone, and at 15, he secretly enrolled in glider training. In 1922, he entered the medical school of the University of Berlin. At that time, the heart was deemed untouchable. Textbooks declared that heart surgery was impossible, and that any attempt to physically reach the heart would cause instant death. Electrocardiograms were still novel, endocarditis diagnoses were guesswork, and heart failure treatments relied on bloodletting and stimulants. Many doctors refused to place their stethoscopes directly on a patient's chest. But Forssmann became obsessed with this forbidden territory. In 1925, he read a French physiology article describing how a catheter could be inserted through a horse's jugular vein to measure cardiac pressure. The idea ignited him. If a catheter could safely reach the human heart, then doctors could measure pressure directly, draw blood samples, and even deliver medication inside the heart. Such a breakthrough would transform diagnosis and treatment. His professors dismissed the idea as lunacy, branding him an amateur showman. After graduating in 1928, he interned at the Charité Hospital in Berlin, where his temperament irritated his superiors. In 1929, he was transferred to a small district hospital in Eberswalde, 60 kilometers west of Berlin. It lacked even a surgical microscope. The chief surgeon, Richard Schneider, was a strict Prussian traditionalist who despised new or experimental techniques. But for Forssmann, this small hospital was an opportunity. Supervision was loose, and no one monitored him closely. That summer, he secretly performed animal experiments, practicing catheter insertion on dogs and rabbits. But animal results could never convince the medical world. He needed human proof. The first human subject had to be himself. One night in July 1929, he prepared everything: a 70-centimeter urological catheter, local anesthetic, a scalpel, a mirror, and the only nurse willing to help him, Gerda Ditze. At 8 in the evening, after the hospital had quieted down, he brought Gerda into an abandoned machine room and locked the door. "I need you to hold my arm," he told her, "but the one I'm going to insert the catheter into is myself." Terrified, she thought he was joking. But Forssmann had already disinfected his left elbow with iodine, injected lidocaine, and made a clean incision to expose the antecubital vein. Gerda nearly fainted, but she steadied herself and handed him the catheter. Slowly, he advanced it. 20 centimeters, 30, 50. After each movement, he asked Gerda to listen with a stethoscope to ensure it had not entered an artery. At 65 centimeters, he felt a strange vibration. The catheter tip had reached the right atrium. He knew he was close, but he needed proof. Supporting him, Gerda helped him sneak into the basement X-ray room. The old machine required manual exposure. Forssmann held the catheter with one hand and pulled the lever with the other. When the film was developed, they were stunned. A thin catheter was clearly visible, entering the superior vena cava and curling into the right atrium like a slender snake entering the heart. In that moment, Werner Forssmann became the first human in history to place a catheter into his own heart. He documented the procedure and submitted it to Germany's leading surgical journal. Editors thought it was a prank until they saw the X-ray. They reluctantly published it. The medical community exploded. Many condemned him as a madman, a suicidal fool, a disgrace. A professor at Berlin University declared that Forsman belonged in a psychiatric ward, not a surgical one. Only a few forward-thinking doctors recognized the significance of his achievement, but the hospital dismissed him for unauthorized and dangerous experimentation. In 1932, Forsman eventually found work at Berlin's Rudolf Virchow Hospital under the legendary cardiac surgery pioneer Ferdinand Sauerbruch. Sauerbruch was the most powerful surgeon in Germany at the time, inventor of the negative pressure operating chamber that made open chest surgery possible, yet even he dismissed the heart catheter as meaningless. When Forsman tried to convince him to support further research, Sauerbruch responded with cold ridicule, telling him that his little tricks were not even as useful as taking a patient's blood pressure. After the rise of the Nazi regime in 1933, Sauerbruch became one of Hitler's personal physicians, while Forsman, refusing to join the Nazi Party, was marginalized further and relegated to working as a basic urological surgeon. During World War II, Forsman was drafted as a frontline military doctor. In 1944, serving with a field hospital in Norway, he was captured by Soviet forces. Even in the prisoner of war camp, he used a thin wire and rubber tubing to perform makeshift heart catheterizations that drained fluid from the hearts of critically injured soldiers, saving dozens who otherwise would have died. A Soviet army doctor once asked him how he dared insert a tube into the human heart, and Forsman calmly replied, "I already did it in 1929. That was far more difficult than this. After the war, Forsman returned to Germany only to discover that his name had been forgotten. Meanwhile, the technique he pioneered had flourished in the United States. André Cournand and Dickinson Richards repeated his experiment in 1941 and systematically established the method of right heart catheterization, transforming the field of cardiology. In 1956, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded jointly to Cournand, Richards, and Forsman, recognizing their groundbreaking contributions. When the news reached Forsman, he was working as the chief of urology at a small church hospital in Dusseldorf, spending his days performing prostate surgeries for elderly patients. When he received the call from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, his first reaction was to assume they had dialed the wrong number. At the award ceremony, the 52-year-old Forsman stood in white tie and tails in Stockholm's concert hall, alongside the two American professors as the King of Sweden presented them with the prize. In his speech, Cournand openly acknowledged that none of their achievements would have been possible without Forsman's bold self-experiment in 1929. Forsman's own speech was brief, but one sentence moved the entire audience. "I only did what any true doctor should do when faced with uncertainty, to use his own body to seek the truth." In his later years, Forsman lived quietly in a small village at the edge of the Black Forest. He declined all media interviews and hated being called a pioneer or legend. To his neighbors, he was simply a kind old doctor who liked repairing watches, going fishing, and explaining to children how the heart beats. On the 1st of June 1979, Forsman died of gallbladder cancer at the age of 74. Before passing, he said to Gerda, the nurse who had handed him the catheter 50 years earlier, that what he had feared most on that night in 1929 was not death, but the possibility that the catheter would not enter the heart and he would prove himself a fool. From beginning to end, he remained a stubborn, proud German doctor who refused to bow to authority. With his own heart, he opened the first door to modern cardiac medicine. And even today, every patient treated in a catheterization laboratory and every life saved by cardiac intervention carries a connection to that summer night in 1929 in the basement of a small hospital where a young man placed a catheter into his own heart. His name was Werner Forsman. Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and share. I'm Thattstrange, and I'll see you in the next episode.